interest of time, I had a similar set of questions, needless to say, that I sent to our esteemed panel. I happen to know several of these people, and my experience with them as leaders is such that I don't want to be overly prescriptive. I think each of them have had experiences in understanding the potential of the people who we call our children and our adults, as Dr. Mamta said, who all need a fair shot. And so rather than go through the analytical approach, I would just like to ask each one of the speakers to, if they can, pick the moment when they realized that there was something they could do that would enable a group of people to solve their own problems with their own talents and capabilities, or whatever the other thing was that really moved them to recognize that there was a work to be done to enable that opportunity for everyone. Let's start on the end and come this way.
Sure. Hey, thanks, David. I was listening to the earlier conversation on scale, a big believer. So, let me share a personal story, right? So this is a school in Nalasopara, right? Not too far away, 1.5 hours away. It's a private school, so there are not too many government schools there, unbelievably, and charge 2,000 rupees a year, so reasonable. Spoke to about 10 kids, 6 girls, 4 boys, class 11. 3 things which jumped out. One, everyone's wanting to become either police officer, doctor, engineer, or fashion designer. So, amazing aspiration, point 1. Parents are sofa maker, electrician, unemployed, technician in an industry. Lack of role models, clearly articulating that parents are paying this money. They will not have the money to pay to finance college education after class 12th. And finally, if you just play this forward a few years, a lot of dreams will be hurt. It was, I'm a consultant, right? So analytically, you can make the case in many ways, but when you hear the stories and you almost see that if you fast forward this a few years, there are 3 problems which are affecting this group of 10 kids. One, there is fundamentally a gap between what the school is educating, which is pass exams, versus what jobs need. So that was 1. 2, there is a bridge period. So there are, a 10x gap between number of kids coming out of school, class 12th, and number of kids who can be absorbed into colleges, 10x. And third, none of these people want jobs which are unskilled. Thanks to social media, which is great, and internet, which is great, aspiration levels are sky high. Jobs in McDonald's is looked down upon. The attrition rate of churn rates of those jobs are also very high. So if you just put this together, it just sort of hit me. If we don't do something in a very simple way, bridge the gap between demand and supply, we are in the country where growth is going to come at a blistering pace for the next 30 years. But there are 9 states in India where basically there is oversupply. There is oversupply in rural India. There is oversupply in places where these schools exist. If this gap is not bridged, we are going to be in an amazing situation where at a gross level, we are seeing growth, but maybe 1.5 out of 4 kids will get left behind in this growth. And that just sort of shook me up. There are obviously repeatable models and ideas to scale, but at least the problem hit me in its full intensity in the school and in that conversation. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Vikram Jain. I'm with FSG. So big believer of scale and market-based approaches. So a lot to be said about shared value and how corporates can play a big part. So, education, right? What is the problem in education? Again, at scale, right? So, 90+% of children are in schools. Most children are not learning. You have various data from education initiatives saying in grade 10 they're reading at grade 4 level. You have the ASA report saying at grade 5 they're reading at grade 2 level. Then our own work with kids in grade 1 shows 4 out of 5 kids cannot read simple 3-letter words in grade 1. Now you open a grade 1 textbook. So pretty large words. So what's happening to these children? They're going to school because mommy sent them. In the school, there's a high discipline environment. So finger on your lip and just listen to what's happening. And basically, it could be in Chinese and the result would not be any difference. Right? So we believe that a large reason why this is happening in the early grades is because of the rote memorization technique. So most kids can read A for apple, B for bat, C for cat. क्यों? क्योंकि क्लास में वही टीचर लिखती है A for apple, B for. But if you say SAT, can you read SAT? 4 out of 5 kids can't. Most kids will tell you, आप अपने ड्राइवर को पूछे कि आपको कैसे पता आपका बच्चा अच्छा पढ़ रहा है? He'll say ABCD बोलता है, 1 to 100 बोलता है, Jack and Jill बोलता है. You ask the same kid, is 18 bigger or 22? You write down 4 numbers, single digit numbers, and say which is the largest number. Kids don't know that. So the problem is that kids are going to school and are exposed to rote memorization techniques. And what we want to do is replace rote memorization technique with activity-based learning. And we want to do that at scale. We want to do that in 300,000 affordable private schools in India. And maybe as the conversation progresses, I'll talk about that. But for us, that was a moment like, there is this problem facing us, and here everybody is saying, oh, ये school में books नहीं है, so let us supply books. Oh, if a kid can't read, what's the point of giving them books? So there's a lot, at least when it comes down to, what can the corporates do, I think there's a lot that the corporates can do to create value by just bringing these points to your CSR committees, making them realize that, it's outcomes that we need to measure, not the inputs. And what sort of a journey of, why is this even happening? So why are schools not adopting activity-based learning? The point is, parents demand rote. मेरे बच्चे को ABCD सिखाओ, 1 to 100 सिखाओ, नहीं 1 to 200 वो स्कूल सिखाता है, वो ज़्यादा अच्छा है. Parents are unaware of what are the right markers for early education. They're not building skills, they're just building recall, and which is why the problem is happening. So again, another campaign like Swachh Bharat at scale, Ratta Maar ya Samajhdar. Something to think about.
Goodness. I think since we're talking about shared value, I'd like to talk a little bit about trust, because I think it's a word that we don't really comprehend and we don't really inculcate in the way that we look at these kinds of partnerships and engagements. We've been very blessed to have a 5-year partnership with Apple on a 35-year-old education model that sits outside the formal system, that in fact doesn't even use teachers who have a formal certification. Now, that took an enormous amount of trust on the part of Apple to see that we had an experience and a knowledge and a success rate in stopping urban migration of rural children, in 86% of the children who went through that 5-year model starting businesses of their own in rural areas, in those children themselves becoming teachers within that system. So they looked at all of the indicators that you were talking about, the real indicators. We understood that early childhood marriage was being reduced because we were developing math and critical science skills in girls, such that they were able to actually take decisions and inform fathers on agricultural decisions, where to sell their crops, how to rotate the crops, which crops one should plant. So I think this issue of trust really sits at the heart of developing and nurturing the best kinds of shared value relationships. And they really begin with organizations that understand and know their expertise at such a deep level that we feel comfortable to engage with somebody who is willing to vision it at scale. I think I'll leave it there for now.
Taking on partly from your point about talking about share value, I actually want to talk about something slightly different, and I want to talk about selfish value. And I say selfish value because, I work with the Children's Investment Fund Foundation. We are the world's largest philanthropy dedicated to children. And we're trying to do lots of things, improve nutrition outcomes, reduce sex trafficking, improve maternal and child health indicators. Problem with that is that no one really cares. Politicians don't care about these issues because it's not a burning issue. It's not like corruption or inflation or any of the other hot potato topics. And so my moment increasingly has been about how do I identify what is that selfish value that somebody else can find in the work that we're trying to do. Let's take the example of young people and what we're trying to do with 16-year-olds or 17-year-olds. Why should a politician care? There is really no reason a politician should care unless you've got a slightly bigger heart than average. But if you look back at the elections over the past few years, the margins of victory in India are desperately low. Chhattisgarh, for example, which is in elections, the vote margin is 0.7%. Every year, for the next 10, 15, 20 years, the percentage of first-time young voters is going to be in excess of 5, probably even 10%. That's the reason why politicians need to start understanding this, and that's the reason why we as a community of various practitioners and generally people trying to do good stuff have to start thinking, how do I get politicians to care? Because the guys who deliver the biggest scale in the country are the government. The second part on the selfish value bit is that you can, provide secondary school for girls, and you can give them adolescent reproductive information, and you can do lots of, cute stuff. It changes nothing until it changes the fundamental power imbalance in a family. If I'm a, relatively poor family with 5 kids, and I've got, boys and girls, I regard the girl as a cost head. I need to manage that cost until I can get her married off. So therefore, what are the compromises that I make? The dinner table, I will invest in the boy because he's going to generate money for me at some stage. So I give him more rotis than I give the girl. There's a 50% higher chance for a boy child to be brought back to hospital within 24 or 48 hours if they fall ill than a girl child. Why? Because I've started making those cost assessments right away. And so increasingly, it's almost like education is relevant. Primary education, secondary education, vocational, nothing matters unless we get a chance for the girl to earn money. And it almost doesn't make a difference how much they earn. Any amount of money gives them power.
Good evening. I'm Nixon Joseph from SBA Foundation. Most of our speakers have covered about the ills affecting the education sector. I'm from Kerala, where literacy is 100%. And I was just going through the reasons how it could be possible. Then one major factor was that most of the public took advantage of the private school system in Kerala. So that was a reason why Kerala could get 100% literate status. In India, mostly education is under the government system. I knew about the intimidating state of education or school system when I was in Meghalaya, Garo Hills, where I found that there were no proper infrastructure for the schools. Quality of teachers was horrible. Most of the children left the school after a 3rd standard or 4th standard. Attrition rate was very high. And it was not a great botheration for anyone. And one fact I found was that those who could afford education, they left the place and got educated at public schools or the schools in hill stations, and they later became IAS officers or politicians, and they were secure. But for the population who was left in Garo Hills, the system has not much changed even now. But then it struck me, I was a banker at that time, it struck me that something has to be done from every person's level. How can I bring some change? So when this SBA Foundation opportunity was there, I grabbed on that, and now I am looking after the CSR activities of SBI. We get, as I told you, the quality of education to those who cannot afford is in a very bad situation. But as has been shared by the speakers, even those who are getting education, they are not doing learning. Critical skills or problem-solving skills are lacking in our students. So when I was in foundation, we get a lot of proposals from NGOs, innovations, where they are trying to bring these qualities into schools. But then I have found that most of these have been, these innovations in education have been successful in a controlled atmosphere. Being a banker, I used to examine these proposals from the risk angle also. I find that most of them have not been tested properly. There has not been a rigorous check on the impact. So unless there is a demonstrated impact and cost efficiency, and whether this innovative education system can fix into the present education system. If these three are not taken care of, it will be difficult for, as a funding agency, to support this innovation. So another, I will tell a very good thing which our foundation has done is we are sending highly educated youth as fellows to tribal areas where they are doing that project in tribal schools, improving the quality of education, making education an enjoyable experience, training the teachers. All these our SBI Youth for India fellows are doing in schools. So these are two things where SBI Foundation gets does in education sector. What I wanted to tell here is, though innovations have to be scaled up, the kind of innovations which come to us, maybe 3 to 4 innovations come to our SBI Foundation every week. Then they have not been properly tested. I find it has been successful in the NGO-controlled environment. And unless we have a system in India where these things can be properly tested, or there is a yardstick for that, it may be challenging to scale it up.
Thank you. Okay. So I'm going to tell my story, and then I'm just going to pass it back down again for people to add. A number of people today have talked about the nature of the human beings in this country. I've found that they, unlike most places, go after the most difficult problems. What are the most difficult problems in equity in education? I would suggest 2. One is all of the kids 3 to 8 years old who can't walk to the government school. That's a significant problem. That's a few million kids. If they arrive at the government school at 9 with nothing, they'll fail. We've also had a lot of comments about urbanization. Another of the most significant problems is there's also a couple of million kids that are out of school because their parents have migrated. And finding those kids, and just that is a challenge. But because they have to go back to the grade appropriate level by law, It's an impossible challenge for any normal situation. So what I would like to tell you is there are 2 organizations that have figured out the solutions to those 2 problems. Those of you who've been here previously know that I've called out one of them. When you leave, if you have not heard of this organization, I would just suggest that you Google EKAL. What you'll find is an organization that runs single-teacher schools in 63,000 villages. It's the most scaled education organization in the entire world in terms of number of locations. The budget for 63,000 schools is $25 million a year. One thing that changed my life was when I drove 2.5 hours, 2 hours on a road, and a half an hour so slow that the kids coming home from school were passing the car as they walked. Getting the drum beats, going into this little school, having the 30 kids sitting there, having the girls come up and lead the first third of the program without any direction from anybody. And then seeing the lights in those kids' eyes as I spoke in English and my presentation was translated. And they ask me questions. The first question, who's your favorite God? If you'd like to know how I answered that, talk to me after. Second experience that changed my life. I'm with one of our scale leaders. They're a scale leader because they're a grassroots NGO organization that operates in 34 countries. They are going to be a huge beneficiary of the move of PEPFAR AIDS money to grassroots organizations. They're going to go from less than 20% to 70% in 30 months. These guys are huge scale in the countries that they're in. I'm with the leader of HPP India. I go into a school, a government school, to see their Kadam program. This is the program. It's a blanket. Sitting on this blanket are 30 kids ranging from kindergarten to 6th grade, all of whom are out of school 9 months ago. All of whom are sitting on the blanket with one teacher and with these amazing workbooks that enable them to operate independently at their own speed with the support of a single teacher, with a measuring system of each of their progress on the wall, which tells them at the end of their time when they can go age appropriate. 32,000 kids in Haryana into the system in 2 months. 9 months later, 15,000 kids go into their age-appropriate classes. 6 months later, 98% of the kids whose parents didn't migrate during that 6-month period are still in school and doing well. This is, 2 years ago, you couldn't have found a single person in India who thought this was possible. You couldn't have found a single person in the world who thought that was actually possible. Now they have MOUs with 3 more states. They're building out the Kadam centers. There's 500 centers in Haryana, just in Haryana, 500 centers, 500 blankets. I walked up to a little girl, and I couldn't understand how she could be there because she was clearly only 18 months old. And next to her was a 2.5-year-old. And I walked up and I high-fived her. And then I turned to the teacher and I said, I don't understand. She can't, this doesn't make sense. The teacher said to me, those are the siblings of the young woman sitting in front of them. What? You allow her to bring her 2 siblings to the class? Oh, no, there's 3. That one's also her sibling. No questions? No questions. Those kids sat there while watching with pride as their sister learned her math and her reading. I was just amazed. So those are two experiences that changed my view of equity for education. Please, final comments.
Education, like infrastructure, requires a lot of funds. So just expecting corporates will take care of it may not be a correct suggestion. I would require that some funds should be established, especially for education, in the way infrastructure is being financed. Otherwise, this sector will continue to be like this. So my suggestion for innovative financing is that we should have an education development fund in India, which can be contributed by philanthropists, high net worth individuals, CSR funds, etc. Thank you.
Rohini Nilakani has a very interesting phrase, and she says that to tackle tough problems, you need Samaj, Sarkar, and Bazaar. How do we deploy this in the pursuit of education, livelihoods, income generation, equality, etc.? Part of me says that right now, you think about the country, you think about the district, or you think about the state, or you think about whatever network, whatever cut you want to make of it. Girls don't go to secondary school mostly because if they got a primary school at 1-2 kilometers radius of 5 kilometers, now a secondary school, you need to travel 20 kilometers, 30 kilometers. They're not going to travel that far. So you almost need microeconomic planning at a 5-kilometer radius of every single village in the country and determine what are the kind of economic opportunities that can emerge there and what is likely to happen over the next 5 or 10 years. Because otherwise, you're going to have this bizarre situation where we have a big vocational training program in the country. Apparently, if we don't, control it, we're going to have like 50 million girls trained on beauty parlor operations and 50 million boys trained on carpentry because somebody just picked those two skills. That makes no sense. You're going to have to do it village by village, acknowledging that if the girl can't travel 20 kilometers for school, secondary school, she's unlikely to suddenly wake up and start traveling 20 kilometers for a job. Part of what that will also help will be to not stop, but significantly, hopefully, slow down urbanization, as our cities just can't cope anymore with the pressures that are being put upon them.
I'm going to build 100% on that because at Barefoot College, this is exactly where we've arrived now, which is across 96 countries, looking at, for women and adolescent girls, looking at what are their economic prospects, letting go of all our ideas about becoming educated in a formal sense, educated in that box that says you sit in a schoolroom and you tick your boxes and you have your rote learning and you go through examinations. We let go of all of that. It's about how do women and girls acquire critical thinking skills, the actual vocational skills to be able to produce and to participate in a formal economy in the way that works for them. Exactly in the way that they define, and believe me, they know. And if we give them the opportunity to be listened to be heard about what are the skills they know they need to acquire, and we open up the idea of education to more a concept of learning, open learning, and this idea that we should, each and every one of us on the planet, be able to access the knowledge we want to have and need to have, and we should be able to contribute as much to that content, irregardless of our literacy skills, irregardless of a formal education. We are walking into and I mean running into, not walking into, a moment when the environment around us at work and at home will think faster, learn faster, and create faster than we can as human beings. We are no longer going to be the expert. There are going to be machines who do that for us really quickly. We have to develop in all of us a constant, fearless, fluid way of looking at learning. And what I see in the developing world, what I see every day in India, I was sitting 3 days ago with 75 rural women, illiterate women, who were learning to use a mobile phone, but learning it with a very specific outcome, which is to establish trust-based credit for fellow women. And I was reminded anew of just how quickly people who haven't had a formal education adopt new concepts, learn new things. They are not encumbered with what they think they know, with their own expertise. They are just able to engage with that new content completely openly. And it's extraordinary to see what happens to our human capacity when we take away those fixed and arrogant ideas of who can learn, how they can learn, what they should learn. It's really time to move into a completely new paradigm for education.
I'll build up on the Samaj, Sarkar and Bazaar. And I'll speak a little bit about the Bazaar approach. So 86% of low-income families in urban India are sending their children to affordable private schools. The Uber drivers, the people who are, attending to you at restaurants, the pav bhaji walas, the vada pav walas are all sending their children to affordable private schools. They are already paying 18,000 rupees per month per child to get education. If we can get corporates or companies who have activity-based solutions and are selling in the high-income schools to sell this product at 10% of the price to affordable private schools, which is about 1,500 per child, and we can do that, the quality of education goes through the roof. So sustainable businesses get established who continue to scale up because of the profit mindset and because of shared value that they're creating, not because there's a subsidy over here. So there is a role for Bazaar over here. There is a role for corporates who have activity-based solutions, and we have partnered with 8 of them, and today are serving over 55,000 children. Our hope is to impact 1 million children through completely market-based solutions where there's no subsidy involved, but just addressing the ecosystem barriers that these companies face when they approach the low-income school environment. So rethink, and again, totally agree, there are multiple approaches, and there are a certain section of society, I totally agree, where some sort of government or philanthropic action is required, because without that, they'll not get access to schools, but recognize that vast majority are going to affordable private schools where, if you ask your driver, they'll say, I'm sending my child to a private school. And if you ask him, बाजू में government school है, वहाँ पे क्यों नहीं भेजते हो? हम इतने भी गरीब नहीं है कि अपने बच्चे की education में invest नहीं कर पाए. Build on that, right? I mean, all of you are from the corporate environment. You realize at the end, that's the service we're offering. Can we offer them high quality education rather than just education? So I'll leave that.
I think this is the disadvantage of going at the end after such great ideas. But I just want to link a few thoughts, and I think this is very actionable. If you deconstruct the whole thing, I think the biggest benefit is we are in a country which is growing and going to create jobs. And I'll tell you why that's critical. Today, there are, I love the point about the trust-based learning, but there's a point after which the kid has to get a job to break the cycle of poverty. You have to earn money, because in India, if you do that, you get respect, you get into a completely different zone. And all of us have, flourished through education. We have broken through economic barriers compared to our grandfather, father, and ourselves. So let's talk very practically. In every micro market defined by 100 kilometers, companies such as yours should say, what are the jobs I'm going to create? And I'm, just to, when we work, and we're working with two NGOs, one is Magic Bars. When we went to our clients as Bain, they say, look, I'm going to open up centers, retail stores, BFSI, manufacturing, in district after district of India, because that's where the growth is coming over the next 10 years. So in that micro market. And then think right to left. Today, the whole problem in the education sector is we think left to right. Let's train on A, let's train on B, let's create carpenters, let's create beauty. Look, isn't that like silly? Just think right to left. In that micro market, what jobs are coming up, right? It's interesting. Thankfully, there are very few micro markets left in India where jobs won't come up in the next 10 years. That's a good thing about India. The economy is powering through. But those micro markets are not working back to the schools in that vicinity to inject the right courses, the right kind of curricula, and more importantly, role models. So the kids actually know how to get into those streams. Because once you taste success, then the kid's completely going to go into another trajectory. So, my humble request to this group is if you can take a step from the right to the left and connect this imbalance, at a gross level, India, the number of jobs will exceed the number of kids coming in. But if you slice it by state, you slice it by rural, urban, you slice it by girl, boy, the problem is it's disparate in all these axes, which means 9 states will get left behind in India, rural India will get left behind, urbanization will happen, and girls will get left behind. So if we are just going to take that one step from the right to left, we can actually solve this problem. It's a solvable one. And completely echo the points, which is, I think a lot of actions are happening on the left to right. High time corporate India took one step, and your point on the CSR and the foundation, if one corporate can take a step at scale and show it, there'll be a herd mentality, and in each sector, companies will start jumping. We need one pioneer company in each sector to take the first mover. That would be my request.